My name is John Hutchinson Sukhdeo. I am 27 years old and I identify as a mixed-race male. My dad is from Guyana. He was born in British Guyana and then immigrated to England during the Windrush generation. I think he came over in 1965. My mum is white British. She is from a big working class family in South London. And then, yeah, she met my dad up in North London. I grew up with my two sisters and my mum and dad in quite a big household. And my nan and granddad used to sort of support us and help us with childcare when we was younger. So they would often come up and stay with us as well in the house. So it was nan, granddad, two sisters, mum and dad in one big house. Yeah, I definitely did, but at different points in my life. So I'd say in my early stages of life, so sort of primary school up to maybe about 10 years old, I definitely identified a lot more with being white British. And I think that stemmed from having nan and granddad in my house who were white British. They used to sort of enforce on me that I was just British and almost used to sort of disregard any other race that I was and would tell me, you're not Guyanese, you're British. So then that was kind of my identity at home, was just, okay, cool, I'm British. But then I'd get to school and people would often ask me like, where was I from? And I used to tell them like I was British and people would be like, no, but you're not. And I wouldn't be able to understand as a young man why people wouldn't accept the answer that I was British, although my nan was telling me at home that I was. And then the primary school that I went to was a predominantly white primary school. So there was almost like a lack of identity with other students as well. So you kind of had this need and want to feel like a white British young boy, even though you knew you wasn't because you looked different and felt different. So definitely in my earlier years, I'd say I identified a lot more with being white. But then when I got to secondary school, I went to a secondary school that was a lot more diverse. There was a lot more representation of Caribbean students and I had made Caribbean friends. All of a sudden you start to feel a lot more empowered in your own race and feel a lot more comfortable with being around mixed cultures basically. And then a big part of my own identity changed when I first visited Guyana, when I went back and saw where my family was from when I was 14 years old. And then it's almost been like since that moment, I've definitely felt like I've identified and represented Guyanese culture a lot more than British culture. So it was like two journeys of childhood from sort of early ages, only identifying or wanting to identify as white. And then sort of 13, 14 plus, only identifying and wanting to identify as Guyanese. So it's like a sort of tale of two stories. And then I only think as I sort of entered my 20s, you then start to find comfort and accept that you are and you can be both. But I think when I was younger, it was always one or the other and it was confusing that you didn't fit in either or, if that makes sense. So, yeah. I think one thing that represents that I had an issue with it was we had a public speaking competition when we was in secondary school. I think it was in year 9, and you had to choose one topic that meant something to you and you had to speak on that topic. And I chose, basically, when I have to tick an ethnicity form, I have to tick other. And for whatever reason, I chose to choose that as my topic of like my public speaking, because it basically made me feel like I didn't fit in anywhere, because on an official government form, I have to tick the box other. And the reason I have to tick the box other is because my dad is from British Guyana, but his heritage is Asian Guyanese, as well as mixed Guyanese with what he's mixed up, but predominantly Asian Guyanese. So on a ethnicity form, you have Black, Caribbean, and British or white British. You have Black African and British, or you have Asian and white British, but you don't have Asian Caribbean or Asian and mixed Caribbean. And So all of a sudden you have to tick other and then specify what you are. And that again adds to that sort of issue of not feeling like you fit in anywhere. And because of that, I think it must have played an issue on my own identity, because even on official government forms, I'm seen as an other. So yeah, I think I definitely had that issue growing up, and then that sort of sticks with me throughout. Is just that feeling of not feeling part of one group. You're kind of caught between so many different worlds. I think black culture, in my household from a young age, was stuff that you was around, but didn't really understand that you was around it until you now start to see it as black culture. So there is a lot more empowerment in black British culture now than there was when we was younger. And at the time you didn't realize that it was black British culture. So something as simple as like the candy dance at a family party, or listening to old calypso tunes at a family party, for example, eating certain foods at a family party. Instantly I'm thinking family parties, was a real sort of celebration of black British culture. And yet you didn't really understand that's what it was until all of a sudden you meet other friends and realize that we're all the same. That we have the same parties, same dances. This is how we get down. So yeah, I wouldn't say I understood it for what it was at the time, but later on, I definitely sort of feel like that was what you experienced at home, based on meeting other friends and realizing you're sort of coming from similar experiences at home. The first time I ever remember race being mentioned was watching the France '98 World Cup, and my dad just telling us we're supporting Brazil during this World Cup, and he gave me a Brazil top as well. And I said, why are we supporting Brazil? And he said, because most of the team look like us and they represent us. And I said, what do you mean? He said, they're men of color and they're black men, and we support them. So then at the time I didn't deep too much into it, but when I think about really early stages of understanding what race was, my dad had already enforced in me that we support black and we support our own. And it was from that France '98 World Cup. So then people would question to me, why you support Brazil? You're not even Brazilian. And I would say, well, because they have the most black players. And that was the first time. And then people, again, being in a predominantly white primary school, people would be confused by that answer. But it was just my first example of speaking on race. So yeah, it was from that World Cup, France '98. Going back to before I was born, I know, well, later on my mum has opened up to telling me that she couldn't tell her parents that she was having children with a black man. And that was because she was scared in how they would react. So she'd dated my dad for over 10 years and yet couldn't tell my nan that she was even dating my dad until she was pregnant. And it was when she was basically going to have to find out, because she was about to have a child. And then my nan's, and I feel weird speaking of this because my nan was honestly the love of my life. Like, I loved her so much. But my nan's reaction to finding out that my mum was pregnant with a black man was just that I think she was just like really resentful of my mum, and she just wasn't like supportive of it at all. And then there was like some really sort of harsh comments that I'm not going to repeat because I don't want to tarnish my nan's name. But there were some harsh comments that she made towards my mum. So that was from before we was born. And then I think as we grow up, I guess my nan would have had that struggle because she comes from that generation of sort of post World War II working class London, where sort of foreigners were seen as coming over here for a better life. And that was her mentality. So to then have her own grandchildren be these foreigners, she probably then had to sort of conquer her own issues of race as well through us. And you kind of felt it as we grew up as kids, that there was certain incidents that would happen with Nan being in the house, being this, I would say, being this racist older white woman, but yet having mixed grandchildren. It was like it was quite a strange dynamic. I remember one major conflict happening when we was coming back. It was my nan, my two sisters were coming back from France, and we got stopped at border control by French police, and they pulled her in for an interview. And my nan was like, "These are my grandkids," and they wasn't accepting it. They were saying, "No, they're not," to my nan. And I remember my nan wiling out, like she was getting so upset, because for her, this is like a realization that she now knows the system also sees what she sees, that they're not the same as her, or we don't look like her. And then the fact that her surname was Hutchinson and my middle name was Hutchinson and my surname Sukhdeo, that still wasn't a good enough answer, and they wasn't accepting it. And I don't know how long until it got solved, but it was like, I remember I've never seen my nan so upset before, and it was just because police, border control were telling my nan, "These are not your grandkids," and they wouldn't let us back into England for ages. And it became a major issue. So yeah, there's always been those conflicts with nan and then herself having mixed grandkids, and same with my mum and dad. I'd say yes, both. I'll speak on two perspectives, from my dad and from myself. My dad then became quite open in talking about racism, and his sort of issues with racism were also a real black and white thing. So he always used to tell me from young, society and British society will see you as either black or white. And it's two rules, he used to say. He said there's a rule for black people and there's a rule for white people. And unfortunately, because you're mixed, you're always going to be seen as black. And he used to speak on his experience of going to football matches when he was younger and being chased out of football matches by other football fans, just because he talks of the time where there was this thing in Britain called packy bashing. And that's where football fans would actively look to beat up any person of Asian descent. And because he looked like he fitted that category, he just said he used to go to a football match and instantly feel unsafe. And then there were a couple of times when he got chased out of the stadium by his own set of fans just because he presented as an Asian man, and people were following that packy bashing incident. Then speaks of other incidents of being stopped by police when he was younger, and incidents that he experienced when he used to attend Notting Hill Carnival and how he used to watch police brutality then. So these were like quite obvious forms of racism. But then my dad also speaks, and I've watched it happen with my dad when I see my dad and my mum together, and you see like a lot more subtle forms of racism. So another example would be, again, crossing borders when we would come back from family holidays between France and England. And my mum would say, "All right, Robbie, let me take the steering wheel." Robbie's my dad's name. "Let me take the steering wheel. I'll drive through the border control because I know there's a lot less chance of me getting stopped than you." So although like as a young child, you'd be watching that and just think, okay, you just accept it because that's how it is. But that's like a lot more of a subtle form of my dad experiencing racism. Yet it's more just avoiding any conflict and trauma that he's already experienced as a man growing up. I'd then say for me, I think I've sort of experienced two forms of racism. It's like overt racism, which has been obvious. So that's been stop and search by police when I was younger, quite a lot, particularly between the ages of 16 and 18. Even recently during the lockdown, I was stopped. When I was at work and when I was teaching at school, police came and stopped me and my friend after work just because we was in the school grounds and they was questioning why we was there. Like, so there's that sort of obvious, we know what it is and we know why you're stopping us. But then there's also a lot more subtle forms. And that comes from when I tell people I play tennis and people say, "Really, you play tennis?" And it's like, well, why are you shocked that I play tennis? And it's like, it's not in your face racism, but I feel like it stems from the fact that because I'm mixed, or because to you I might present as black, you wouldn't assume that I play tennis, or you wouldn't assume that I'm a teacher or that I work in schools. So sometimes if I tell people I work in schools, they say, "Really?" I'm like, well, why are you shocked? Like, what is it that's making you shocked that I work in a school? So there's the subtle forms and then there's the obvious forms. So yeah, they're the two types, both from my dad and from me. So like I spoke on already about primary school, primary school, I definitely had a lot more feeling of feeling like an outsider, because I was one of two mixed race boys in the class, and then there was two black girls in the class, and besides that, the rest of the class was white. So you had this feeling of not feeling like everybody else, and it was a lot more of like a isolating feeling, being in primary school, and there wasn't much taught about your history or your culture in primary school either. Besides, I think the only sort of representation I can ever think of when I think of my primary school education was we did The Lion King as our year 6 play, and my teacher said to me, "John, you can be Rafiki because you can do your Caribbean accent." And it's like, well, Rafiki's, now I look back on that, I think, well, Rafiki's from Africa anyway. So it's just this instant just grouping that John can be Rafiki because he can do his Caribbean accent. And it didn't feel empowering at all at the time. So there was definitely that isolating feel in primary school. And then that changed in secondary school because I went to a more mixed school, and all of a sudden I found myself with Jamaican friends, I had Ghanaian friends, I had Nigerian friends, I had Bangladeshi friends, I had friends from everywhere, and it felt a lot more comforting knowing that you was part of other groups of people that look like you, have family experiences like you. But then the only difference was again for me, having Asian Guyanese descent, still feeling Caribbean and culturally feeling Caribbean. But I remember there was once a debate in school and someone was saying, "John's not mixed." And I was like, remember having to defend myself saying, yes, I am mixed. But I think, and this was from a black student as well. And I think this was only because the instant assumption of what a mixed race person presents at is half white, half black. So like a common example would be maybe half Jamaican, half British, or half Nigerian, half British, which is what you often see in schools or in society. And yet because I was mixed Caribbean and English, but not necessarily black Caribbean and English, it was this confusing, I mean, he's mixed race, but he's not mixed race. He's Caribbean, but he's not Caribbean. And I used to feel like I had to prove my Caribbeanness to some of my other friends to show that, like, yes, I am with you. So like showing that I know every soca tune, showing that I do eat curry chicken at home, showing that my grandma does cook roti. It was like this constant wanting to prove that I am just as Caribbean as you are. So I think especially with like supporting the West Indies cricket team, for example, these are all conscious choices I made as a child to prove my Caribbeanness. And it was definitely a bit of a confusing time. And it was because I didn't necessarily present myself as what other Caribbean students that people have seen might look like. Yeah, so I'd say I've experienced some microaggressions, as what I've mentioned before, in terms of maybe people not believing certain things that I've done or experienced. Let's say like getting involved in tennis and playing tennis. And I think that stems from more of a class problem that we have in Britain as well. And I think people struggle to understand the concept that you can be mixed, black, and middle class. By people, I mean a lot of white people seem to struggle with that concept. So when my dad, for example, is big into his skiing and he loves skiing, and he'll talk to people about skiing and people will be like, "Really, you ski?" And it's like, why are you so shocked that he skis? And it's because of this class problem that we have, that someone from the Windrush generation who has worked hard and made a successful career, so is now comfortably a middle class man, but yet he is black. So how is this possible? Do you know what I mean? And this is a battle that I've witnessed him fight. And then again, it boils down to us. So I've had quite a privileged upbringing, and my parents have provided a lot for me, and I've experienced a life that I know many others haven't. And I've had these experiences, and yet when I still tell people that I've had these experiences, people will be so shocked. And it's like, why are you shocked? My parents have worked hard just like yours. They've got a successful, they've created a successful career just like yours. So why are you shocked that I'm experiencing this lifestyle? And it's that constant shock that people have, and you know it's down to the fact that you're a different color to them. You just know it all the time. So yeah, I definitely say that these are like small microaggressions that you have growing up. I wouldn't say I've necessarily experienced any obvious systemic racism. The only incident I can think of from growing up would be in sports clubs. So playing tennis and playing cricket, again, it boils down to that feeling of feeling like an outsider. And I used to play in a cricket club with the same players who I played with for my school cricket team. And when I played with them, when I played in my school cricket team, my school used to put me as opening bowler and opening batter. And I used to get loads of opportunities through the school cricket team. Then this same club with the same players, when I'd be playing in this club, I wasn't picked to bat and I wasn't picked to bowl. And I used to always tell my dad about these frustrations in why was I not picked to bat and bowl. And he just used to, as a throwaway comment, just say, oh, it's due to racism. And then you just, again, you'd hear that word and be like, okay, cool, it makes sense. Because you just accept it, and we wouldn't challenge it back then. And then when it's only now when you look back and reflect on it, you think, right, that was actually a really oppressive feeling. So nothing career-wise, but more in the sports club, and particularly in sports like tennis and cricket, I think there's always this hindrance of opportunity based on who you know at the club. And it doesn't always feel like it's down to your playing ability. It's down to what they want to see for their club. Because sports like cricket, like tennis, again, I touch on the class sort of system and how they are quite middle class sports. To then have someone who doesn't fit the category of what they're running for their club, it begins to boil down to like a different feeling of oppression. So that's what I've experienced through sport. I'd say when talking on culture, I'll speak on two cultures. So one being Guyanese culture, and I have family in Trinidad too, where colorism is a major issue. That is often related to the Asian Caribbeans sort of holding a higher place of hierarchy compared to the Black Caribbeans. And I know that's a big issue both in Guyana and in Trinidad and other parts of the Caribbean too. And then the other culture I'll speak on is Black British culture and London culture, where colorism I think is a major issue, and a lot of it boils down to, and I think back, as soon as I think of colorism, it takes me back to being 17, 18, and I'll speak on when I first started partying, and at the time there was this song called Who's That Lighty, and Lighty was the first, it was like a funky house tune, and Lighty was the first lyric that they'd use in the tune, because there was this perception of Lighty being attractive. And I remember going out and partying, particularly I'd say when I turned 18 and I went to Malia, and the phrase Lighty was used to me a lot, which was something I'd never identified as before. But when I got to Malia and I started partying and meeting other girls and stuff, people would be talking to me and talking to me as a lighty, and being a lighty was to be attractive. So I'd say colorism played a major issue, because then you used to feel like you was attractive because you had lighter skin. And when I think of the age time in which that was definitely 18, 19, 20 throughout university. It was this feeling like you was more attractive because you was lighter skin. One obvious one that jumps to mind when you ask this question is when people meet me for the first time and they say, "What's your name?" and I say, "John." The first thing they say is, "Nah, you don't look like a John." And I say, "What do you mean?" They say, "You look more like a Jordan or a Reese." And they would always use those two words. And again, it boils down to the grouping mixed race men as one. So we are all the same person. And then the other incident I'd speak of is people have had the confidence to come up to me who I don't know. So I think it's different when you know them and you're friends compared to when you don't know them. So random members of the public has come up to me and said, "Right, you look like Drake, you know." Or they've said, "Hey, you know," or people have come up to me and asked for photos before because they mistook me for Loftus-Cheek and Lacazette. I've had as well. So it's this instant stereotype and grouping of mixed race men as just all being the same person. So I think when I think of someone telling me I look like someone, I think, is that really an issue? Yes or no? But then when I actually think about it, I've never ever approached a random white man and gone up to him and said, "Hey, you look like Robert De Niro," you know, because I just know that everybody is their own person. Or I wouldn't even say, "Can I have a picture? Because are you Robert De Niro?" It's like this weird concept that you have as being mixed where you know. society just sees you as the same person. And I think the look-alike and saying that you look like a Jordan or a Reese is just because they're categorizing you as just one person. So your race identifies you as you're all the same, instead of understanding that everybody is an individual person. So yeah, I'd say that's a stereotypical thing that I've experienced. Yeah, and I think that's based on a societal problem too, based on females don't only have to face the battle of race, it's also the battle of gender. And I think with women, there's a lot more around beauty expectations compared to men. I think men have less pressures from society on beauty expectations compared to women. And I think to sort of have the pressures of beauty expectations as well as being a female below a male as what society sees, is much more of a battle than what male face. From speaking to mixed race friends, female friends, it's like you don't only have the battle of race and identity, but you also have the battle of gender too. There were times when as a group we would be stopped and searched by police. Again, it boils down to the ages of 16, 17. And it was this weird, and my group of friends at the time were a predominantly black group of friends, or they still are my friends to this day. And there was this weird dynamic that used to happen when we'd be stopped by the police. I would be the first one to speak for the group. And at the time, you don't think nothing of it because it was this unspoken thing. It's like, John's going to speak to them. It's only now, or as you grow up and you research and read a lot more, do you look back and you realize you were the only one speaking to the police because you know you were seen as less threatening because you're lighter skinned. So to society, you are less threatening than what some of my black friends would have been perceived as towards the police. And then another, I guess it's a form of privilege, but another sort of comment that I've had growing up as well is when I be out or when I be partying, sometimes if you'd be chatting to new people or chatting to new girls, one of the things that would instantly come up in conversation was, I would have such nice babies. And there'll be this conversation on the fact that you're mixed and you're going to have, well, I mean, we didn't have, but you're potentially going to have children with someone else from a different race. It instantly means your babies are going to be beautiful. And there was that weird dynamic behind that comment being thrown your way growing up. So it was one, knowing that you were seen as less threatening, and then two, knowing that people would tell you you were more beautiful. Yeah, they were like weird dynamics of light skin privilege, I think. I'd definitely say find strength in understanding where you're from. So all these confusing battles I had growing up as a child would have been solved if I'd have researched my family history from young and had it educated to me from young, because then you don't feel confused anymore. So if somebody's going to tell you you're not Guyanese, you're British, or you're not British, you're Guyanese, which is what you have on both sides. If you understand your family's history, so where your mum's family have come from on the British side and where your dad's family have come from on the British side, and why they are the way they are and why they look the way they look, then you'll find strength and you will find comfort in your own identity. So to my younger self and to anybody else, if you're having any identity issues, just find out your family's history. And if you can't find out your family's history for whatever reason, then find out what was going on in those countries or in that area at that time, and it should be able to provide some more clarity.